NHL highlights, and more. Sign in with your TV service provider or subscribe at sportsnetplus.ca.
You're watching Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest today is Ben Lobb, who is the MP for Huron Bruce. And for our Kincardine viewers, this is Politically Speaking. It may be a new show to you, but it's a pleasure to be with you in Kincardine. I'm actually in Owen Sound, and Ben is in Point Clark. Hey, don't you love the miracle of technology? Works for me. Ben, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. It's a pleasure and first time.
Yes. You're not the first Kincardine guest. I did have Mayor Moffat on before you, but I did say to Alex Ruff, "Hey, you make sure you tell Ben that I don't bite."
Right? Yeah.
Okay. So I hope he's done his work. Anyway, Ben, this is. You were a long time and experienced member of Parliament. How many terms have you been elected now?
Been elected since 2008. So
you've
quite a few terms in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of water under the bridge here. You have a lot of experience, which I think is really helpful because you've done something that is actually quite rare. You had a private member's bill, which was called C-234, not only get through the committee stage in the House, it passed third reading in the House and is now sitting in the Senate. And as one headline out said, it's one vote away from passing. That's it's not quite the sun rising in the west, but it's unusual. It
is. You're right, and it hasn't been done too many times. And for the scale, this is going to impact farmers to the tune of $1 billion over 10 years. So a lot of times with a private member's bill, it's correcting this, fixing, just little minor tweaks to the law or an act. But this is a fairly significant change and an improvement, and it's putting a lot of dollars back into farmers' financial flexibility. So it's very, very promising. However, last Thursday there was some political shenanigans as things would happen, and some of the senators just they really did an unprecedented move and was more or less supported by the speaker, which was unusual, very unusual. And the speaker allowed for adjournment, and there was adjournment. So for 15 days, this bill can't be discussed or debated unless the speaker brings it back to the Senate. So the other thing that's unique is a lot of senators and members of Parliament are learning, myself included, learning different parts of Senate procedure, which does operate slightly different than how the House of Commons operates. And so I've had different people who are interested in politics in Huron Bruce come up to me and say, "Man, that's really something how it works in the Senate." And so it's been quite an experience.
I have to agree. I read the transcripts of the most recent Senate session, and it was remarkable. Very, very different from the House of Commons. There is a little more genteel way of questioning things, a little more formal way of speaking that we would, and the speaker is a little more proactive in their engagement with the senators. It's quite remarkable. I think one of the things that I found interesting was that one of the senators tried to, and you have to remember that while there are political affiliations, my understanding is that most of the senators are still independent, and while there are some party connected senators, there's various different groups. But one of the interesting things was a senator tried to introduce an amendment to the bill, which had already been defeated.
That is true, yes. And that is another tactic. Most believe that is a tactic by the Liberal government in the House of Commons trying to get one of their appointed senators to amend the private members bill. And this is another thing you learn as you're working through this. If a private members bill is amended in the Senate, it comes back to the House of Commons. I think we all understood that. But if it does come back, there is unlimited debate. So every single member parliament has the right to speak to it at private members' time, which it would be years. It would be years to get through that, and it would never happen. So it's disappointing because these amendments were brought up in the House of Commons committee, in the Agriculture Committee, and they were defeated. And they were defeated not just by Conservatives, they were defeated by members of the Bloc, members of the NDP, and also agreed to by the Green Party, but they don't sit on the Ag Committee. And then when it came back to the Senate, they did the similar amendments, and they were defeated at the report stage vote 42-28. So both times it has been amended and the amendments have been defeated. And I was actually talking to a senator yesterday. We were on a panel for a different topic, and he was very upset. And he's an independent senator. And he said, I believe when it makes it through its way from the House of Commons to the Senate, and there have been amendments accepted at committee, because there were a couple amendments accepted at committee, that should be considered a finished product. That's a private member's bill. Now, he has a different view if it's government legislation. Doesn't matter the political stripe of the government of the day. That's fair game. But in his opinion, and again, I'll stress he's an independent senator, his opinion is when it comes from the House of Commons to the Senate, it should be completed, and the senators can dig into it. They can look at it, but they're voting on the bill as it is presented. And I think at the end of the day, that's how it is going to end up. And the new senators, yes, even though they're called independent senators, they are more or less liberals. Not all, but there is quite a few who are liberals. And Roger Kusner, he'll be sworn into the Senate this week. He's a former Liberal member of Parliament, so obviously he's a Liberal. But there are some that are truly independent, and that's great. Senator Black, he would be one of them, and he's a great friend to agriculture. And I'm sure Senator Black is very frustrated with what is going on. He's been to countless farm meetings and organizational group meetings and talked about this bill and how important it is. And for it to be held up again is quite frustrating. And if you think about it, this has been a fairly wet fall, and the farmers are using a tremendous amount of propane and natural gas to dry their corn this fall. And wouldn't it have been great if we could have had this approved in the spring, before the end of the spring session in June, and have it implemented in place for this fall? That isn't going to happen. If it does get passed, it'll be likely in place for the spring or fall of 2024.
Well, let's go over the key points of the bill. My understanding it is to remove the carbon tax, for want of a better term. There's probably a more technical term, the carbon tax from farm use of propane and natural gas, correct?
That's correct. Currently, I call it the Carbon Tax Act, but the Liberal Party calls it the Pollution Pricing Act. It's the same thing. There's a number of exemptions listed inside that act. One of the exemptions is for gasoline and diesel fuel to be used on farm. And that is set in there. And I've always said, and many have said, that it must have been an oversight that the government did not include propane and natural gas, because according to anybody, it's a much cleaner fuel to use in combustion engines. So I've made that point, but to answer your question directly, the purpose of my bill is to make an amendment to allow propane and natural gas to be side by side with gasoline and diesel to be used on farm. The two other amendments, roughly speaking, is to add, so that would be for drying of crops and other conditioning of corn or whatever other process you want to use in there. In addition to that would be heating of barns and buildings. And the buildings would be a building that would be used for growing food, such as in mushrooms. And the other thing that was included in there is a sunset clause of 8 years, so that in 8 years from the time the bill's passed, that they can go back and look at it and see if it still makes sense, that type of an idea. So that's really what my bill does, and what makes it so straightforward and easy, for a lack of a better term, to make it clear for people that put the bill together from a legislative and legal frame point, and for members of parliament or senators that are voting on it. The other part that I'll highlight that actually came out in the Senate committee, and it was the day I was there, is I've always said, and many have said, this had to have been an oversight, that propane and natural gas were not included. And a government official came on and he said, no, that in fact, whatever Lobb's saying is wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. We actually modeled it off of British Columbia's carbon tax policy and plan. And I give one of the senators credit, and she pointed out to him, she said, why would you base a program off of British Columbia with moderate climate, the most moderate climate in all of country, and a province compared to the rest of the provinces grows very little grains? And so I thought that was a great point, and the official didn't have much to say for it other than what it was it was based on the BC model. But if you look at from Ontario to Alberta, it's a completely different climate when you look at the 12 months of the year. So to me, it was an oversight. It was an oversight. And many of the comments, and of course, with the Green Party and the NDPs, they're basically saying there's no alternative. There's no practical alternative. And that's right. They're right. You can't heat your livestock barn with a heat pump. That's just not going to be practical. And you can't let the sun dry your corn, at least not in Ontario. So these are things. And so I look at it, especially when the Liberals made the exemption for home heating with your oil. I believe they should have lifted it for everything to help Canadians out right now with a tough budget. But also at this time, if they want to provide relief, they got to help farmers. And you think over 10 years, you're putting $1 billion back into the farmer's pocket when, they have inflation in everything they're buying and everything they're doing. And and anybody will say, farmers don't make the market. They are what you would call a price taker.
One of the things that I know around here, there are a number of very large poultry barns, and they are using, and I know a couple of the farmers, they use a lot of natural gas. And when natural gas came by their driveways, they said yes, because they didn't have to spend money on propane. So I think it actually adds to the idea that, natural gas, if it's used for these purposes, is simply a farm input. And let's hope that some sanity will prevail here.
Yeah, and it's possible too that people don't realize, some people that don't live on a farm, how warm those barns need to be maintained in a fall and winter climate. And with a broiler farm, when the little chicks first come in, it has to be over 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And hog barns not too far off that. One pork farmer told me his carbon tax bill in the month of March 2023 was $3,500. $3,500. That, you can't make that up anywhere, really. It just comes out of your bottom line.
And eventually we have to pay it in the price of our food.
Correct.
But that's a whole other argument. Actually, that's a good segue into the. Actually, before we get into the next subject, I was going to ask you. Your bill will come back at the next session of the Senate, which is in mid-November, another week.
Correct.
Okay, because Parliament is on a right now is not in session. It's on an off week. The House isn't in session, and neither is the Senate. Correct.
That is right. Yeah.
Yeah. So next week, it will after the I guess the 19th, 20th, of November, it will be back in session. Do you anticipate it will come back to the floor of the Senate at that time?
I think the safest thing to say is we'll have to see. We'll see. Mm-hmm. I believe the Speaker is given a lot of leeway and latitude. I think it is set for the 15 days, but I do think she's given quite a bit of leeway and latitude with it. And so the other thing that's frustrating is she could call debate back on C-234, my bill, and another senator could pop up, my old pal Roger Kusner, he could pop up and say, yeah, I'd like to have a adjournment as well. And it could just keep continuing itself. So I think what the senators who are in favor of it, what they're asking for is let's not play games. Let's just have a vote and see if it's going to pass or if it's going to fail. And what a lot of the senators know is that there's many members of the Liberal Party, members of Parliament who are Liberal. They want this bill to pass as well. You know, there's still some rural members of Parliament in the Atlantic provinces, and there's Northern Ontario and, you know, the northern parts of each province. And they have the same feelings, and their constituents and the farm producers in their areas are telling them the exact same thing.
Sure. Well, it will be interesting to watch for sure, because it's as I said, it's an extreme rarity for a private member's bill to reach this stage, and we will have to see. Hey, maybe the next time we'll talk, I hope they haven't adjourned it at that point either.
Yeah,
but we'll see. But we talked a moment there about prices and so on, and heck, cost of living keeps going up and up and up, and inflation is sort of being wrestled around with. But the government is bringing in a financial update, the 2023 fall financial update, and Minister Freeland will be standing in the House, and the box gets opened, and surprise, we get whatever we get, I guess. So what are you anticipating or hoping for with the fall financial statement?
I think what I would be looking for is a path back to a balanced budget. And I know with the fall economic update and the spring budget, everybody wants to see, just like you mentioned, what little goodies are in the budget. But I think the best goodie that we could give Canadians today is a balanced budget, and to address the long-term impacts of our debt, our federal debt. Because if you take a look at the financial numbers that their finance publishes every year, and then when they do a fall update, there's a lot of ground shifting underneath our feet right now. And when we look at the debt today versus 8 years ago, it's more than doubled, and that's a sad reality. I know we went through COVID. Not all the spending was for COVID. There was a lot of other goodies that were included in that number, but our total debt is way over 1.6 trillion. They quote net debt, but net debt is a little misleading because that includes your Canadian pension plan dollars and the Quebec pension plan dollars, and I don't really look at that as government money. The CPP is the people's money as far as I'm concerned. And so we need to address our debt, and we need to eliminate our deficit. Approximately $45 billion a year now will be allocated to servicing our federal debt. That's huge. I believe that's the largest line item in the federal budget. That and old age security, $45 billion to service the debt on our just to service our debt. The other concerning issue is there's a tremendous amount of money that is coming up again to be renewed. And so that's in the form of T-bills and short-term bonds. And for the last number of years, it's been approximately $400 to $450 billion a year. So you think about it, over 4 or 5 years, we've almost recycled the entire amount of our debt. Not really, but in a way it is. And the problem is we had so many years of low interest where government could have locked in long-term bond rates, and now we're paying full price as far as the government goes. The other concerning thing, I think, for all Canadians, for us trying to get rid of inflation, is with our friends in the United States. Their spending is wild compared to ours, but 33 trillion in a U.S. national debt. The deficit in the United States is 1.7 trillion, which is almost the size of the entire Canadian economy. So when you're looking at how are we going to get inflation down, the U.S. has got to get their act together for delivering a balanced budget, which they haven't had in years. And that's going to help us out as well. But the main reality is government spending got us into this hyperinflation, and government spending, the reduction of it, is going to help us get out of the inflation problem we're in. And if you look back at 2015, there was a balanced budget delivered and inflation was around 1%. And so it kind of backs up what we're saying here about the value of a balanced budget and the value of maintaining the country's financial standing. And it's not too different from what your grandma and grandpa would have taught you when you're a little kid. You don't spend more than you have, and you squirrel some away for when that rainy day comes. Well, I'm sorry, this government has not done that.
Mm-hmm. It will be interesting to watch what both the Bank of Canada and the American name escapes me. The Fed.
Jerome Powell.
What the Fed does. Certainly in the last few days, there has been strong suggestion that the increases in interest rates have probably reached their maximum. We'll have to see. I do not have a crystal ball. And I'm sure you don't either.
No.
The other interesting thing, though, was that the deputy governor of the Bank of Canada did say in the last week or so that we can expect these interest rates to go down, but to return to those days of 1% and 2% interest is probably not realistic. So we've got to kind of learn to live, dare I say it, the way we did 30 years ago. Because that's really what it really means is accepting the fact that there will be interest rates that will have to be paid.
Well, I'm sure that Tiff Macklin and Jerome Powell and likely, governors of the banks around the G7 and maybe even the G20, but especially the G7, they're likely saying, if the spending side of government would just stop all this spending, we would not have to be raising rates as hard as we did. And the amount of interest rates that were brought on to Canadians and Americans is really unprecedented. Not the 5 or 6% that you may pay in your mortgage, but just how fast it went up in a percentage term. Certainly people who are older than me will remember the days when they bought their first home in 1980 or 85 and the rates that they were paying, over 10%. But certainly to go from where it was a couple of years ago to now and what people were paying, the other real concerning thing is, I'm sure, for CMHC, who provides mortgage insurance to the banks and to individuals buying homes, to the Bank of Canada Finance, is the number of mortgages that will roll over in the next 2 years. It's, I believe, 40% of all Canadian mortgages will renew in 2024 and 2025. And those mortgages were likely signed at 2.5% to 3.5%, and now potentially could be 5% to 6%. which is going to make a big difference in how much money people already have in a very, very strained, probably household finance situation right now. So this could also impact how the Bank of Canada moves forward. They also have to protect the dollar against the US dollar. We don't want our dollar to go to 50 cents. So there's that as well in interest rates. But in credit worthiness, Canada is the leader in spite of our spending amongst G7 because they've also had way, way too much spending. So this is it's an unfortunate gift that this government has given our children and our grandchildren. And it's also unfortunate because it's been for many decades as well that this spending has taken place. But I think finally the can has no longer any road to be kicked down. And we have to start not cutting, but just get to a balance and maintain a reasonable level of support and spending for programs going forward. Maybe cut waste. Cut waste. We could cut some waste.
Hey, there's always that.
There definitely is.
Once we get past the financial statement, how many more sitting days? How long will the House be in session? Till mid-December?
Yeah, it goes to about December 20th, 22nd, wherever it is. It actually works pretty close to Christmas Day, and there is some leeway amongst the House leaders to determine the exact date. But I suspect right around December 20th that the House will sit. And obviously they'll have the fall economic statement to pass. They'll also have the implementation of that bill to pass. So there's two bills. And there's likely the Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement that they'll likely want to get passed. There's C56 they'll likely want to try and get passed. So there are probably 4 or 5 bills that they would like to be dealt with before the Christmas break takes place. And I'm sure that all the parties will work to make sure that happens.
Yes, I think we have to remember that all the parties have to sit in the same house. And, if the Liberal NDP agreement is still in play and solid, it probably means things will happen. But after Christmas, you're off for January? Is that right?
Approximately, yes. Yeah, it goes back. January 20th or 25th, I think. I'd have to look at my calendar, but that's about what it is. That's about what it is.
So everything will go quiet for a little bit, at least, we hope.
I don't, I've been in this long enough to know that is exactly likely not what's going to happen. It's
okay.
Just always be on red alert, I think, these days.
Well, Ben, I want to thank you for the conversation today. It's good to talk to you, good to meet you, and always good to hear your perspective. And I can assure you, we will be back. We'll have you back on again. Friends, I'm David Shearman. My guest today has been Ben Lobb, the MP for Huron-Bruce. Thank you. And yes, we'll talk again.
This is Rogers TV.